Good morning, Jake. I'm glad you cover this. Nobody else does.
Well, we thought it was important to point out it's one of these kind of strange situations. Now, the interesting thing that we pointed out is they should have gone to court here. The Democrats and either side should have gone to court, or the Democrats should have taken it to court to have it solved. They decided to go to the House Administration Committee, which is an internal process in the House of Representatives, and it's not been solved so far. It's really strange.
Well, Jake, let's pause for a moment. There's no reason for Miller-Meeks to go to Congress to court. She won, and there was a recount. I believe there were two recounts, weren't there?
Yes, it was. I think there were two. Yes.
Yeah, and so painstaking accumulation. Sometimes elections are one vote and two. It's rare. 400,000 votes. Marjorie Miller-Meeks wins by 6. So, under what authority does the House purport to act to toss out Miller-Meeks and replace her with the defeated Democrat?
There's no real authority that the House has. You're right. The House does decide, as you know, Hugh, whether to seat a member of Congress, or a candidate in this case, to be a member of Congress. And I think that's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to use that authority. But yes, bizarre. And the Democrats, I'm not sure how they resolve this, to be honest with you. I'm not sure how this all comes to a conclusion. And by the way, this all plays into the fact that Democrats only have a couple-seat majority in the House, 4-seat majority. It's going to get thinner. They're waiting on some special elections for people who left Congress to go to the administration.
Yeah, I think it will end up being a 222 to 213 margin. And they might really, really want that seat because they need one more vote. But the fact of the matter is they have to take it away. And, Jake, my view is they didn't dare do this during the period of time when there were questions about fraud in the elections and whether or not, and I don't believe there was fraud of any significant greater amount than occurs in every election. There's always some fraud in some places. But I didn't think they dared do the optics of stealing a seat so blatantly. This is, in my view, a trial balloon to see if anyone will notice that they're trying to steal it. And you're the first person who noticed it. Did you get any pushback on this?
No, I've not. To be clear, this has been reported. We're not uncovering this story. We were just pointing out the absurdity of the whole thing, and some of we were doing a bit of a judging a report card, I guess we should say, of Pelosi and McCarthy's first 70 days of this Congress. I think it's 71 today, and this is something that is a quite bizarre episode.
Now, I want to play for you Janet Yellen yesterday, because I just want to call attention to the Democrats are going to try and steal a seat. If enough people pay attention, they won't do it. But they've already passed the $1.9 trillion. Here's what Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, said yesterday. Cut 12.
Policymaking is about identifying and addressing risks. And the most significant risk we face is a workforce that's scarred by a long period of unemployment. People being out of work, not able to find jobs, can have a permanent effect on their well-being. I think that's the most significant risk. Is there a risk of inflation? I think there's a small risk, and I think it's manageable. Prices fell a lot last spring when the pandemic surged. I expect some of those prices to move up again as the economy recovers this spring and summer. But that's a temporary movement in prices. To get a sustained high inflation like we had in the 1970s, I absolutely don't expect that. We've had very well-anchored inflation expectations and a Federal Reserve that's learned about how to manage inflation. So I don't think it's a significant risk, and if it materializes, we'll certainly monitor for it, but we have tools to address it.
Now, Jake Sherman, you're too young to remember whip inflation now, the win buttons that Jerry Ford made infamous. You're probably too young to remember having to pay 12.5% on an adjustable loan to get a house in the mid-'80s. How often do you hear anybody talk about inflation, which has been so long gone because of Ronald Reagan and Paul Volcker? How often do people bring it up?
Not very often at all, period.
Do you think that's going to change? And if it comes back, will it be the Biden inflation?
I don't know if it will come back. We point out this morning, and this is a bit off topic, but not really. It ties all in together. Goldman Sachs, which is we all know is a big financial institution, put out a note last night that indicated that they expect 8% growth in the economy this year, and less than they anticipate by next year, an election year, as we all know, 3.3 or 3.5% unemployment, which coming off of this this crisis is quite astounding.
You know, when the stimulus passed under President Obama in 2009, it was very, very popular. By 2010, the Democrats lost 63 seats, I believe. Short-term gain, everybody's going to get a sugar high from 1,400. Are they not aware, Jake, that that is going to be ancient? No one's going to remember these checks in November of 2022.
I tend to agree with you, Hugh, but and I just had this conversation with Kevin McCarthy last week, I believe it was, when he said that it was that the stimulus bill was as popular as this. It was never as popular as this. This is in the 70s in almost every poll I've seen. The stimulus right after it passed was about 54%, and dropped to 51%. Approval rating. But I take your point, and I think that's it's an interesting thing to think about is, will there be any political upside in November? I would say that there's a pretty good chance that there won't be, but I will say this, Hugh, if they're able to pull off a bipartisan infrastructure bill with no tax increases, that could be an interesting political move for them as well.
That will require the 50 votes again. That's reconciliation.
Yep.
I do not believe that anything other than big tech laws will pass in a bipartisan fashion because Democrats are unwilling to build the wall, and immigration reform would require the wall. What is the level of alarm within Team Biden about what has quickly become a catastrophic situation at the border under their policy, Jake Sherman?
I will say, they seem a little bit flat-footed in the sense that they are trying to figure out how to respond. I was taken aback last week when we interviewed Ron Klain. We pushed him on this, and he said if anyone has any suggestions on how to solve it, he's willing to listen. I found that to be an interesting response from Klain on this topic.
You know, Jake, they just gave LA $1.3 billion. And so I'm expecting LA to solve their homeless problem. There are only 66,000 people who are homeless, and that's a lot in LA. That's about $20,000 per homeless person. They can fix homelessness in LA. If they spent $1.9 trillion and they can't build the necessary number of shelters, what is wrong with these people?
It's been interesting to see how they've dealt with it, because Jen Psaki last week also, when asked about this, suggested it wasn't even the White House's policy; it was DHS policy, which, of course, as we both know, Hugh, is complete nonsense. Everything that's happening right now is either the Biden administration's policy or an adopted policy of the Biden administration that they've adopted from somebody else. So, there's a lot of anger on Capitol Hill. I could say that about this, and very little hope that there will be immigration reform. Hugh, I think that people are very skeptical about that.
Well, the last question, Jake. The border surge came from somewhere. Where do you think it came from? Why is it happening at the scale that it's happening?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer. I know the White House believes, I think, has conceded, at least in a bleak way, in a kind of roundabout way, that it might have been worsened by the surge might have been at least in part due to what they've been calling more humane immigration policies at the border. So, tough to say exactly where it's coming from, but the White House has conceded that.
I believe it just came from their messaging. They messaged that there would be no more enforcement and the wall was stopped, and then tens of thousands of more unaccompanied minors show up. Jake Sherman, punchbowlnews.com. Thank you, Jake, and I really appreciate your covering the attempted stealing of a duly elected congresswoman's seat in Iowa.